And we are going to start now this last panel on decentralization and sovereignty with three very interesting speakers. First, I would like to abuse, just for means of my role of chairman, to introduce a little the vision for what we have been doing in DigiConnect in the last years on this subject, which perhaps percentually is not very much on the global budget of the ICT program, but still I think it's a significant fraction which is worth being considered. This is actually starting from a study which I like to mention since many years. It's a study which we conducted in 2010 with the Oxford Internet Institute on the future scenarios for the evolution of the Internet. And it was interesting because it shows us axes where to represent these future scenarios. On one side, the decentralization, so decentralization of content, of data, of platforms versus centralization. And on the other axis, the rather commercial or societal value of these platforms, of these services. So whether these platforms were serving more commercial interests and supporting competition, or rather supporting cooperation among citizens and societal values. Of course, these are very rough and generic categories, but just to give an idea of what were at the time, in 2010, the two most extreme scenarios which we could envisage. On one side, there was a scenario which was called power to the people, so based on this vision of an internet supported wikis, social networks in the sense of personal expression, blogs, democracy, etc. On the other side, a scenario called Big Brother, or Big Brothers, as it became clear just a few months later. So a scenario dominated by commercial services, entertainment services as well, or delivered by political interests, very heavy on digital right management, for instance, and financial transactions, etc. Now, it's interesting perhaps to compare these forecasts in 2010 with the reality nowadays. If we were to draw the current scenarios of what would we find? On one side, the big brothers, and we all know this, and more than that, many more, which are the scenario. Then there are some unexpected, if you want, big brothers, which were not evident in 2010, because they emerged from a so-called collaborative sharing economy, but then with an attitude which is not what could have been expected from the name, so the Uber, the Airbnb. Then there is also, of course, a very interesting and decentralized reality of web entrepreneurs and startups, etc. The problem with this reality is that as soon as they become big enough and interesting enough, they get absorbed by the big brothers below, and then we start from the beginning. There is also another interesting reality, which is probably not so much not enough under political attention, which is the reality of social entrepreneurship, of crowdfunding, in general, of true collaborative economy. And then there is, yes, that is the power to the people scenario, represented in a scale more or less comparable to the economic or also social, unfortunately, relevance in just nowadays. So the point is how to support this kind of decentralized social platforms, applications, evolutions of the Internet. Now, it will be interesting to discuss this today with the members of the panel, also because perhaps decentralization is something that has to be declined, has to be better understood in order to see what it really means for Internet applications and services. In general, I think decentralization is important because it's something, well, you can see it as one choice versus multiple choices enabled by decentralization, or net neutrality versus monopoly, or open standards and open source versus voluntary solutions, centralized solutions, or community networks versus clouds, which is the most centralized possible solution for managing data, or the tension between privacy and monitoring, so what is the purpose of using networks, and also perhaps an interesting tension between the artificial intelligence intended as a central processing of big data collected more or less voluntarily from citizens, and collective intelligence, which instead would mean putting together the brain power of citizens in a distributed manner but for a common goal, such as it is being done in Wikipedia or in other collaborative platforms. But this is something that perhaps could be or should be better understood. And then, in general, is the tension between the asymmetric data flows which we see on the big platforms, where we have visibility over perhaps a few hundred friends, and Mr. Zuckerberg has visibility over a few billion people on the planet. And this versus a more decentralized governance of this data, which empowers the citizens and also empowers third parties, small companies or companies of any size to work on this data, to put together, to aggregate this data if authorized and for some purposes on the basis of some common standards. So this fixing this asymmetry in data governance is something that we have been trying to do with some calls in the past. One in particular was on distributed architectures for decentralized data governance, and it is the call for which we selected the project Decode, which I think you have seen many representatives from this project in these 2 days. And also in general, the goal of these actions have been to create a decentralized innovation ecosystem, so something more open to new entrants and to open innovation, and also open to new services, so allowing more SMEs, social entrepreneurs, etc., to implement something which we call digital social innovation. So, for instance, collaborative public services, collaborative economy, collaborative making, participatory consumption, environmental action, citizen science, crowd mapping, open policy making, open democracy. And this, actually, this flower is a flower of all the projects which we have launched in the last 4 years within the area of CAPS, the collective awareness platforms for sustainability and social innovation, where we have a posteriori put together projects depending on these areas. So we did not define the areas at the beginning, we only defined the goal, which was probably to support collective intelligence and collaboration through open protocols, through a multidisciplinary approach, and also a multidisciplinary consortium, and trying to motivate hackers and small SMEs to participate. This is it. And now I really don't want to take more time from members of this panel so we start with Renata Avila from the Web Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. I am Renata Avila, the Web Foundation, and the Senior Digital Rights Advisor for them. And in the foundation, we are very, very worried about how to stop this accelerated pace of further centralization. We are seeing, I think that for the first time in the last 12 months, we have seen an awakening among public opinion and people realizing the risks that the risks beyond just economical risks that big tech is presenting to our society. And we are seeing how this hyper-centralization, not only by design of the technologies, but also by the takeover of different sectors by big tech, is having collateral effects in democracy, having collateral effects in the destiny of collectives, and it is really placing the state, even one of the most powerful states in the world, in a very interesting position that I think that its diplomatic, political, and economic power is designed to protect this monster that they created somehow. So now are aware of the unlimited power of the big technology companies, but they can do very little about it because over the years, as we have seen, the lobbyists of technology companies have penetrated the state itself. So it's interesting the title of this panel because it's decentralization and sovereignty, and to really fix the situation, we need to empower this. I mean, it's very complicated because we have always been advocating for bringing the power back to citizens and empowering citizens as the solution to, as the social innovation platforms are promoting. But I think that we have a bigger problem in front of us, and that big problem can only be solved by the regulatory power of states. And by that, I think that we are in front of a quite unique opportunity where public policy can be leveraged and the public interest can be elevated to fix not only the distortions on competition that these big monopolies are creating, but also try to push that in order to fix the next 50 years of our economy, that we do not only rely on laws, but also on the technological design of the technologies of the future. That's in the states where they have where the technology is being produced and where this can happen. But what happened to the rest of the world? That's my second worry. My second worry is that in the meantime, we have big tech, we have this full dominance, and they're becoming providers to even the entire infrastructure of not only small developing countries in the middle of nowhere, but countries like Argentina, for example. The government has all its email by Google Apps. So, and there are many cases like this. So, in the meantime, you have, in parallel to that, even more concentrated power of decentralization of data. And that's another problem because we are not only the unique innovation that the decentralization of the web enabled has been trumped and has been disrupted for the next billion people who will connect. But also, the next wave of innovation of artificial intelligence, what kind of power the 50% that is not connected yet, and the small countries that are not producing even, basic software to manage the email of the governments, what will be like the role, the creative role for that vast, for the majority of humans in this planet, if the power of artificial intelligence and the raw materials of tomorrow are in the hands of few. We are witnessing, I think, if this structure is locked, and it's going to be locked, I'm going to explain next what is one of my biggest fears. If this power is consolidated and we do not do anything about it now, we risk to have this augmented inequality as we have never seen before, because we will have one of the scenarios that even the OECD is thinking about it, and one of the scenarios of the future that they are discussing is precisely that, one of global tech platforms are the new world order, and data is controlled by large technology firms, and basically we have a division of 1% platform owners, 9% elite global knowledge workers, which will be likely provided by Asia, some countries in Europe, not all countries in Europe, and the US and Canada. And then the rest, the 90% of humanity, will be either in precarious jobs or unemployed. And while discussing all the scenarios, I see that that's the direction we are heading, sadly. And not only that, but in that scenario, when the tech giants accumulate that amount of power, what is the role of the state? And what is the power that the state has at the end of the day? it is basically, as the kings are in some countries today, that it's just decoration and symbolism without any meaningful power. And I mean, in Europe, you have the infrastructure to start addressing the issues, but not the political will yet. And in the US, it's a mess at the moment. And then the big blocs are, sadly, if you look at the case of China, or if you look at the case of Russia, it is not clear the direction where they are heading to, and in any case, they are trying to design solutions for themselves. They are not trying to basically solve the problem more broadly, or in a creative way, but basically they are like creating mini tech emporiums inside their countries, and the same model of huge corporations, state-owned in the case of China, dominating everything. So the third problem that and how these structures are going to be consolidated, that I worry the most about. In last December, I was in Buenos Aires at the World Trade Organization's ministerial conference, and there was a big push by up to 70 countries to start discussing a mandate on e-commerce and digital trade. And basically that, what the big push at the global level will be to pass TPP-like trade agreement covering all the aspects of digital, and things like data flows will be the regulation of data flows, so the country stays in the data stays in a country, or regulations like privacy and security will be discussed at that level. And we know what happens when public interest policies are discussed at the trade level. They get smashed. Fundamental rights usually are not elevated. Regulations are designed in a way to maximize the profit of the more dominant actors, and that, if we are in 2019 in a scenario that a global negotiation in this topic is started, it's likely to be decorated with all the narrative that technology is good because it is good and it's going to deliver the promise of development for everyone. And it will be adopted swiftly by many countries, and that will be a problem because not even the EU regulations kind of, well, Europe will make sure that some things are fixed, but the principles and the premises of centralization are not challenged by this narrative, quite the opposite. Any additional regulation is considered a barrier of trade, and any effort to improve privacy, to improve security will likely be harmed. So that's, in general terms, my worries. My worries is more inequality, more corporate power that already has all the potential to develop even further mechanisms of social control, and states unaware signing these agreements, giving away the last drops of hope that we have left. Sorry to sound pessimistic.
Yes, clearly. So thank you, Renata. Now the next is Benhamou, is chairman of the Institute for Digital Sovereignty.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And I've been working heavily on internet governance issues at the UN, at the European level, and globally we have seen, and that's what Renata was saying, we've seen a big shift in the last few years about the faith we had that the network could, in a way, survive its enemies. And we are seeing that it's not the case, that the enemies come from within and from the outside. And we have to take care of a strange paradox. Let's talk about a recent decision which has been made by the Chinese government, that all the data of the big cloud companies, and especially about Apple, will be forced to be treated by a Chinese company on the Chinese soil. And strangely, what could be seen as an act of sovereignty by the Chinese government, and for obvious political reasons, the control of population, is under a theme that we call data residency. They want data residency in China. Strangely, Europe will have to have data residency in Europe. And exactly for the opposite reasons than for the Chinese to do it. Meaning, we will need to have a protection of citizens by regulation of at the European level. At this time, we trust another agreement, which now is called Privacy Shield after the Safe Harbor, and my take is it will not last. It will be broken, or it will be stopped in the next few years, because we know at some point we cannot trust those on the other side of the ocean. And it's not because only it's the Trump government, and I'm not anymore a government appointee, so I can talk more openly about that. I can say that indeed the Trump administration, one of the first decisions of the Trump administration was to block any kind of right to non-American citizens on their private information, on their privacy online. So all the G29 organizations have been asking for precisions to the US government, and they will not obtain them. Indeed. So we have to take care of a new internet order. The term sounds ominous, and it is, in a way. We have to create a new kind of ecology, or ecological system. I was quoting, just when we were talking before the conference, of a phrase which has been said by a member of the European Commission, of the legal department of the European Commission, Mr. Paul Nimitz, who was saying that in a way we could recreate what Europe has created with the political ecology. Political ecology is born in Europe in the 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. And we need to create that kind of ecology for information, and especially for protection of citizens and privacy. And maybe, if we are not too dumb, and if we are a little bit smart, we can create an ecosystem where Europe not only creates the basics or the laws, like the new GPRD regulations, but also an industry by itself. We are talking today about crypto, we are talking about security, we are talking about protections. Maybe, and that's the interesting part of those last few months' evolutions, maybe the Americans and other developed countries are seeing that protection of data, protecting privacy, is not a thing of the European anymore. It's not something the Europeans do to block American industry, and that's not, I'm not quoting Trump, I was quoting Obama saying that. So basically we have to promote our values and principles, not only because we believe in them, but because also it can protect the evolution of the system and protect it from its enemy outside and inside. We have always said that the danger that could break the internet is not an atomic bomb. The danger that could break the internet is security issues and will of some states to have control on population, and on the other side, the destruction of the internet could be brought by some internal economic actors, economic stakeholders, that could lead to hyper-centralization. And 20 years ago, we didn't imagine that such strong titans, as The Economist is saying this week, the new titans and how to tame them. Those titans could re-centralize the internet, and they are. And Facebook, Google, Amazon are creating a shift and a centralization movement, both for technology, for data, and for the power over the users. And at first we were not imagining those large companies could become so obviously powerful politically and economically. And what's new for us is that we have seen companies which were at first in the technology or telecom industry becoming omnipotent on all sectors. And that's very new. So the very fabric of our antitrust laws and philosophy has to change. At this moment, the regulators of telecom in France, for example, is saying that he's not regulating the big fives, the Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and so on. And they only regulate telecom industries, but it's not true anymore. Obviously, Google is a kind of telecom operator, but it's not legally considered as such. So we have to make our laws evolve, because we could have 800-pound gorillas in the room that could devour or that could break anything. So we have to be sure, and there are intense debates. We were among the very first to draw the importance of the net neutrality 15 years ago for the Commission and the UN. And now we consider that net neutrality is not only a technical issue or a political issue about freedom of expression, it's the antitrust law of the internet. And we have to consider it that way. So basically, we are at very interesting times, even if a very dire one and very anxious one for many, but we live at a moment of foundation. If I may, I would say the foundation in the way certain Asimov was saying a long time ago. We need to create our storytelling for the future. What we want from the internet. If we want it only as a market expression, like our, I hope I'm not vexing anyone, like most of our British friends and colleagues have been saying all along, that's a way to see it. That's not our way to see it. Because we consider it can be a tool for empowerment, for democracy. It still can. And I'm not overly optimistic about that, but I think we have to create the condition for it to happen. And we, Europeans, are obviously the most at the core, at the central place to do it. Our problem with that is that at this moment we have no industry. Like our friends at the State Department were saying when we were at the UN, Europe, how many divisions? How many armies? How many industries that are competing at a global level? If you look at, I didn't put slides, but if you look at the Billion Startup Club, the graphics of the Wall Street Journal, you see that there is 16 unicorns in Europe, among 168 in the world, and those are very small valuations compared with the Uber, the Xiaomi, the Palantir of this world. We need to create large companies if we want to defend citizens' rights, laws, protection, and if we want to have an internet in Europe that is defending them and that is not oppressing them. And it could change. We have seen that with the Russian crisis over the American election. That could change overnight. We could have an internet that become suddenly a very Chinese one, if I may say, with ranking of citizens, with insurance companies drawing all kind of information, even the most private ones, to profile the people, and so on and so on. That's the possibility. We have to have a dual containment from two bad scenarios. Minority Report on one, Gattaca on the other. Look at what happened recently in the US. The Congress is discussing a law that will force all employees to have genetic tests, and if they don't, they will have to pay between $4,000 and $5,000 a year more in insurance. It sounds a bad dream in a bad dystopian scenario, but it's true. It's happening today. China, with its ranking of citizens, due to their appliance, to their closeness to the regime, orientations, and so on. We have to define a way to be at equal distance of Gattaca and Minority Report. The genetic obsessions of the transhumanist movement and the privacy destruction, complete destruction, in a way of Palantir-esque or Cambridge Analytica type of society in the future. That's a very interesting challenge, not an easy one, but that's a very interesting challenge to take and to keep the internet as it was for someone Harry knows very well, like Tim Berners-Lee was saying. We were trying to make a tool for people. If we don't keep it in its core values, and Europe, I guess, is best suited to do that, then we will not have to complain that the new titans are ruling our lives like they are, for example, in Toronto, where Google is running one part of the city on its smart city program without being elected to do so, but they have the power to do so. So either we do that, or we will have no words to say and no reasons to complain. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Renata. See, the question is similar to the previous, so what is the web that we want, the internet that we want. But now, the last speaker, and then we open the floor for questions. So, Fabian Wey from Riseup.
Thank you. I am a late addition to this panel, so my perspective is going to be a little different. A little more narrow and a little more sinister as well. I will focus on the negative potential of the blockchain. My point being that decentralization in many cases is insufficient to empower people. My critique aims more at the way this technology can be implemented and not at the way it is designed. I will give an example where the blockchain might benefit totalitarian ways of control. So I follow the debate around the blockchain for a while now, and there are a lot of people advocating running almost everything on a blockchain. And they're kind of idealizing its decentralization potential. And I strongly disagree. And the argument reminds me of the enthusiastic way in which the counterculture movement embraced the cybernetics, welcomed cybernetics, in the hope that cybernetics would make self-management possible and help to get rid of the corrupted leadership. But as it turned out, this was naive and short-sighted. They set out to challenge the existing authoritarian form of power and ended up with a totalitarian form of governance. And also this, what you said about the internet, it goes into the other direction. So the internet is kind of the tool we created that slipped out of our hands and now is useless to it. Not useless. And I am afraid that this history might repeat itself with the blockchain. So I would like to give an example in which the efficiency of the blockchain could exactly work against the bigger social good or empowering people. So let's just hypothetically say that Turkey would like to implement a new identity card system, and one that actually has a register of all its citizens running on a blockchain. So if they would do that, and they would like decide to have this secure and efficient way, what would keep Turkey from adding additional information to that card? Information like political views, sexual orientation, if someone is Kurdish. I guess you see the direction which I'm going. So the blockchain might just as well provide a totalitarian regime with an efficient way to hold its people accountable for who they are. And again, this is not a critique on the design of the blockchain, it's just a call to be careful with powerful tools like this, like blockchain or smart contracts, and the way we kind of intend to use them. Another positive example for this, trying to make this brief, is France. I don't know if it's true, but that's what people told me. That in France it's really hard to verify the identity of a person, and that's basically due to history, where the French government decided against having a register of its population, because it might fall into the hands of the enemy. This is the idea of the resistance in the Second World War. So they decided to give their citizens the possibility of agency, of revolt against the totalitarian regime. And I think that by deciding against the secure ledger, against the secure register of all their citizens. So, what would be a good way to deal with all of this? In my opinion, the answer is quite simple. Always give people the choice whether they want to use a technology or whether they don't. Apart from the protection it offers in the case of a takeover by a totalitarian regime, which is not maybe our concern all the time, every day, but there are all other beneficial effects to this strategy. While there are many incredibly talented people working on crypto and generally making IT systems secure, the whole digital cosmos is so complex that they all need some amount of blind trust into the work of others. Be it internet service providers, hard or software developers, and certainly the Snowden leaks. They raise awareness, and the developers are working hard and in a paranoid mode to fix the problems. But there are always new revelations and vulnerabilities, like Spectre, for example. And so you have to ask yourself, do you feel comfortable to advise people to really put all their money into technology that might be compromised? Or is it not maybe actually a better solution for most people to just, or quite some people, let's not say most, but quite some people, to just take cash and physically hide it somewhere in the real world, or stash gold in a bank locker? Could you advise them in good faith not to do so? And we should also not forget that we are the most private when we're disconnected. This, to me, is an important point. There were other issues I wanted to address, but I would prefer to now cut this a little short and have a discussion. So let me just jump to my conclusion. The blockchain is certainly not a magical solution to foster autonomy through decentralization. Human freedom does not require blockchains. There is a significant risk that blockchains might backfire and actually harm autonomy. To enable autonomy, people need to be able to choose whether they want to use a technology or if they don't.
Thank you, Fabian. So, now the floor is yours for questions. If you don't have questions immediately, I have already one for Bernard, for instance. You mentioned that rightly that in Europe we have no large companies in the internet. But then you say that this lack of large industries is, or at least that these large industries would defend the interests of citizens, if I understood well. You said that we have no large industries to defend citizens' rights. And that I found a bit difficult to understand. So why should the large industries actually defend citizens' rights and not governments, not ourselves?
Because governments have tools, and that's my old friend Larry Lessig, which talks about that very well, which are the codes from the East Coast, meaning the regulation, and not the code from the West Coast, which means the technological code. And at this moment, if you want to defend and protect citizens, you have to be, and that's what, for example, Sigmar Gabriel, the former Minister of Economy and Industry in Germany, was saying, we have to be where the new standards and norms are being created, not to be, and not to use norms and regulations that are being created outside Europe. And so, if we don't have those large companies on the internet in the next future, then the possibility from the lawmakers and regulators, with all due respect for them, have been bugged, will not be enough. We need companies that can bring those technologies, and including those new generations of technology, awareness of privacy awareness and so on, have to be embodied inside a reality, industrial reality. If it's only on a legal level that we are trying to battle those new titans, we will lose, as we are losing now. Even if we have hope for GDRP to become an interesting tool, even if I respect and like immensely the work of Ms. Vestager for the antitrust regulation, it's not enough. We need to have those giants in Europe too. Please.
Was wondering that who would these giants be? Like the state, who is providing infrastructure?
Oh,
this already turned out bad because the internet, before it was taken over, was basically financed with public money. We still couldn't stand up to these giants. So just if you could precise.
There are many ways for governments to deal with the internet. There is the Chinese way, I said, and there could be a new European way. I wish and advocate for that new European way. But we have the possibility not to have the cake and eat it, but to have large companies and to create a sector where those companies, like for the ecology, the green business is a large business now. The protection of citizens and privacy business could become as large in the near future. But if we are only trying to compete at a low level with small companies and not a large footprint, an international footprint for European companies, then we will become, as we are, 27 states dealing with 4 or 5 large American companies.
That is for sure one, but there are three corollaries of what you say that they see. One is how to create these big companies. So it's out of political will, it's out of genuine market forces, etc. Another point to me, another question to me is, so we truly don't believe that a future internet, an alternative internet, would not be built on large companies, but actually out of small companies, out of small ideas. And then another question to me is, it's true, I understand that we cannot compete or defend our rights only through regulation. So we need some alternative to the current models, to the current centralized models. But these alternatives could be at the level of paradigms. So could be at the level, for instance, of building a more decentralized ecosystem for industries of all sizes to thrive, not only large industries. So perhaps what we need is rather larger paradigms, larger alternatives, and not necessarily large industries.
I understand and I respect deeply your point of view, but I deeply disagree. At this moment, the titans exist, and they have power, market power, which is undisputed, and historically undisputed. So, indeed, we can create, if I may, a Japanese garden with tiny trees and tiny flowers, and it can be beautiful. But at this moment, the value is every day going to Asia and to America, to California. If we don't react and create a counter argument, a counter situation, then we will become a new third world part of the world. That's simple. And I'm not saying what you say about an ecosystem based on our values and paradigm. I agree. Not only I agree, but I've been fighting for 20 years, for 20 years now. So I completely agree. But I believe that if we don't create a way for Europe not to be only a colony of two continents, we are at this moment a digital colony of China and America. That's not something nice to say. That's not something easy to say. That's not something I'm proud to say. But that's something we have to say.
So, we start to see questions.
Indeed.
Gets
in French also I can say there's a long history of French thinking to be a colony of America, and as a result taking model on American models. So that would be really nice to step out on that one. Second history about being colonized by Chinese. Alexander the Great, when he colonized all the world, he stopped at the Himalayas. He physically built saying, after that we cannot go. This is dangerous, this is the zone of the danger. So this is another paradigm that I think we should learn.
We collect a few observations for us.
Yes, my name is Felix. Nice to see you again. It's like
nice to see you.
I mean, I would have a question for Fabrizio's picture, which is now presenting 20 years of evolution in the internet. What do you expect 20 years from now? Because I just did read it in the news, and this has nothing to do with colonization, but today in the news you see that Tencent, the big Chinese internet company, bought a large share of Carrefour, which is French, since David Benhamou's home country. I mean, will it not just be an extrapolation where we had in the past the internet domain, by the big titans came in? Will in the future with Internet of Things, with the new technologies, with the online services, not just be that this would be true for the whole industry, as Europe is not acting fast, they will just lose out in the competition game?
So I was also intrigued by Bernard's comments, and I guess I saw them as slightly, maybe you can unravel this conundrum for me, but it seems to me that right now one of the big influences Europe has on the digital internet is GDPR and is data protection regulation, and I can see it with my clients, with people that all of the discussions around how are we going to deal with GDPR. We need to at least do something, to hopefully, and it's having a positive impact, I think, on cybersecurity and on privacy, and will continue to have that impact, especially as the EU has to certify third-party countries, and so it has an impact way beyond Europe. But when it comes to companies, and Bernard's comments basically were, well, this isn't enough. We're not going to be able to influence the world's internet just through our regulation. It seems to me that the problem is, if I'm starting an internet company, and I'm a venture capitalist, and I have a lot of money to invest, I would not want to invest in Europe. I would want to invest in a country where I do not have as strict regulation. I would want to invest in a country where I can experiment with things that perhaps European regulators would find objectionable. And if I get big enough that I have to worry about GDPR, I can hire compliance people and I can handle it then. And so it seems to me that these two ways of influencing the internet compete against each other. That to have big companies that will be able to compete with Google and Amazon and so forth, you need deregulation. And to have the kind of influence on privacy and the other values that you're worried about in terms of the market, you need stricter regulation. So obviously you're shaking your head and you're saying that's not right, so tell me where I'm wrong.
Reactions to this first set of questions, please.
It's difficult. There are many different questions, but I will begin by the last and then I'll try to... that's what I was trying to say. Maybe I was clumsy saying it. Ecology was seen at first as a hindrance for companies, as a way to slow down their businesses. Now it's part of the business. I guess protection of data, the strict regulation you are seeing as something too tough for an investor to invest in Europe. For now, they're seen that way, but they could be seen very quickly as a way to develop business with a currency, which is not a blockchain-based currency, but for me, which is the key currency in our world, trust. And at this moment, if I may, US are destroying trust at a very impressive rate. Very, very impressive rate. So, if Europe can be the cornerstone of trust, that could be something very in line with our history of Gothic architecture.
Well, I just wanted to make a remark and a pledge to all of you, if you agree. If we are trying to elevate the privacy standards and security standards of everyone in the world, we should stop saying that the GDPR and that privacy is a European thing. It is a human right, a fundamental right, and we need to promote that model to be the model, the default model for our future. And I worry because, again, the reason that I usually am not exposed to trade people, and that's the line that they are using to attack and to undermine the big achievement of the GDPR, which is not perfect. It is a European thing, it is bad for business, it is a European thing, and it shouldn't be applied. Your country cannot compete if you adopt a high privacy regulation. That's what they're saying to the African countries, that's what they're saying to the Latin American countries. And the struggle and the moment to advocate on that is now, and especially in those countries, we have huge European companies have a huge opportunity to, well, I mean, it is not of a choice. We are just choosing colonizer, basically. I mean, you are being colonized, but you are further colonizing, kind of. And maybe we can at least, if we will give away our power and agency, at least to the least bad colonizer. But it is now the moment is key for the big tech is really going like a Tyrannosaurus Rex after the big markets in the global south. And they need the data of India, they need the data of big countries like Brazil, Indonesia, and so on. China is doing exactly the same. And I think that people like you who influence, who have a lot of weight on different decisions, can start like dedicating some time at when you have the chance to speak with governments, especially those governments who are not tech providers or tech consumers, do this small advocacy if we want to push for higher standards. And please, when you think about these topics, do not only think about EU, US. Think that the world is a complex place, and because of neglecting the thinking the big global picture, we are seeing other side effects now, and it's not the desirable way of thinking.
Yeah. I would like to agree that certainly one good way to react to this is on the legal level. It's a lot easier than competing with companies that economically are superior, and to be able to compete with them, you would kind of need to use the same practices. I think there's a lot of economic pressure there. I see the Japanese garden as a good example. You could also call it the Swiss model. So if you kind of start to advocate a safe haven for data, like Swiss might be seen as a safe haven for money, you could get people to come to Europe for legal services.
And just there is an important point that could be also discussed with GDRP and the global evolution of the business at this moment. We have been forced to believe that there is one business model for the internet. Basically the Google, Amazon, Facebook business model. That's not true. There can be maybe other kind of business models. Europe could be and could lead the way, and maybe the GDRP could be a tool to break the idea and the belief that there is only a data-driven business model on the internet. Maybe the risks, as we have seen the risks for the atom in the dissemination those last few months and few years with Korea and so on, maybe there is a too great a risk on an internet and a global society which will be under one belief that the data, and I would quote Bruce Schneier, the security expert, who is saying we live now under the surveillance capitalism. Do we want the surveillance capitalism to be our future for the next decades? I believe not. I believe there could be other kind of businesses or activities that are not Google-like or Facebook-like activities in the internet. That's something we can create. For Europe, I guess, we have three different sectors in which we could and should invest heavily. The new health, connected health, energy and environment protection, which is for me one sector, and transport, which is the third. If we can create new momentum for European companies in those three fields, and especially environment, in which at this moment there is some kind of a 800-pound gorilla which is leaving the COP21 Accord, and which is not going back soon, I guess. If we can create those companies around those sectors, then we can push for another kind, another face, another physiognomy of the internet for the times to come. But indeed, if we simply follow the lines which are existing of Google, Amazon, Facebook, and so on, indeed, we cannot compete. It's too late. It's too late. I will not say that. I wouldn't have said that as a public official, but I can say that as a private entity.
Personally, I would say it also as a public official, but I see there is an agreement that we must find some way to change the rules of the game. Now, how to do this in order not to avoid the competition, but simply there is no competition possible with these giants nowadays with the current rules of the games. Now, whether this has to be done through large companies, through the Japanese garden, which is a picture and also a framework like most, but still, or whether there are other solutions, other business models, other models which are not necessarily based on business, and which normally would or should need more public support. So not just large companies born for the market, but actually also born from public support. So this could be issues for absolutely. So this could be issues for discussion. Actually, to reply to the question of Florent about what if we did nowadays a study on future internet scenarios in 10 years. That would be an interesting point. I think we would be less optimistic than we were 8 years ago. And perhaps it would be written with characters I cannot manage, but for sure you will have some Google Glasses or something else to provide a translation in real time. So before we move to other questions, just a question for Harvey and the organizers. What is the time frame for this session? Because in the program there is no end time. We can go up to
an hour and a half. I'm just going to check on when we leave, but I think an hour and a half, maybe a little bit more is okay. Everybody's very interesting. People are enjoying themselves. We should definitely be over completely by 6, ideally a bit before, 15, 20 minutes before, so people can exit together.
Okay, perfect. This for everybody.
I will check.
So now please, more questions.
So I wanted to ask why Bernard, if I can call for your first name, why are you so sure that European industry would be enough to safeguard all these privacy issues? So you give the example of these green businesses and how market forces could adapt to it. But I know if green business, for example, is enough to solve environmental issues. And I think the problem we have with Facebook, Google, and so is that they are outside of the jurisdiction, right? So this is kind of what makes complicated one of those things. So maybe trying to focus just on Europe is not as good as having something truly decentralized, that you really need a threshold of people in different countries for real in order to break whatever you said. And maybe, I don't know what is Fabian's perspective, maybe like how something that Riseup that I think is done for profit, how to secure things.
At first, the interesting thing, it has been mentioned of the GDLP, is that it can impact companies everywhere, not only in Europe. If you ask me, if we have a certainty that we can become a key player at the same level as Chinese and Americans at this moment, the answer is no, we're not sure. But if we don't fight, we're sure that we're not. If we don't fight to have a real presence, a real footprint on that industry, indeed, we will submit at all levels, political, economic, cultural levels. So that's not an hypothesis, that's not a scenario I want to live. And if I was even more pessimistic, I would say I'm already living it. So we were saying that states and the public funding has been at the base of the internet. We are not using the same tools as our American friends are using. We are not backing our small businesses with the same kind of Small Business Act and Small Business Administration as they do. We are not helping them to gain market and traction through, for example, military funding. All the AI, all the nanotechnologies, all the key technologies. Look at the splendid book of the Italian-American economist Maria Mazzucato, The Entrepreneurial State is the name of the book, saying that all the key technologies in that have been funded by American state. So, at some moment, the free market, as we have been listening to so often, is not enough. And we need to pick some sectors and to invest heavily. I was saying three: health, environment, energy, and transport. That's my take. And indeed, even if we put all the alignment of planets perfectly, you're not sure you will win in the long run. But we have maybe, or if I'm pessimistic, I would say 20% chances. That's not so bad. That's something that was to be.
My question is this enough? So we want to fight industrial centralization with industrial centralization.
I don't hear you very well.
My question is this enough?
Is this enough to do what?
To fight like the centralization of powerful industries in California with the centralization.
Is this enough? At this moment, I was saying to Mr. that we are witnessing a huge crisis of trust, a systemic trust crisis in formation. If it goes further, then there could be a global backlash for the traditional industries, for the internet industries as they are. So, is Europe in a bad position to give another alternative to those technologies and the way they are dealt with by the big fives? Honestly, I think so. But it requires a real political muscle, a real political will. And at this moment, and I say it openly and honestly, at this moment there is none. There is a way for containment. I was quoting Vestager on antitrust and Google, RGDP on privacy. That's containment. That's not offensive. We need a political offensive on industry in Europe on that field. And I would say, and I would advocate for that in the near future, 4 or 5 countries of the historic members getting together, and especially indeed France and Germany, but not only, to give that momentum. And that's something that is gradually coming in the mind.
I think the German example is very interesting, and also the green industry. We have, like, should we trust the German industry better than the American industry?
What? I don't know.
I think that the example of industry in Germany is quite ironic. You were talking also about
they have the same concerns. We all have the same concerns about privacy. We all have the same concerns about extremism. We all have the same concerns of manipulation of public opinion in elections, like we've seen in the Russian crisis, and even in France for the last presidential election. So our basics are the same. What can we trust? We trust, there is a famous thinker I don't quote often, a certain Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, who was saying, a certain Lenin, was saying, trust is good, control is better. Can we trust? No, we have to control. But we have to build the building blocks. We have to create the building blocks. And for the moment, I guess, those building blocks have to be created by some of those large, historic European countries. And after, why not expand it? But we cannot function. That's where I respectfully disagree with the President of the Commission, who is saying we have to have an equal footing for all countries and go at the same pace. No, I do believe in the historic core of Europe being more politically involved evolution. We need, let's say it otherwise. You know, there is in the US job which is not existing in Europe, CTO, Chief Technical Officer of the Federal State. We need to have that in Europe. I will say more. We need to have that in each European country and at the European level too. Someone with a strategic vision of the evolution of the industry. And that's complicated to do, but that's something we have to do.
This position exists in Estonia,
I know,
but not in the big ones
exactly,
which you mentioned before.
Exactly. It exists in Estonia, but indeed we have to create it. We have to create it at the European level because it's something that has to be directly linked to the entire spectrum of activity in Europe, not only for, with all due respect, DG Connect, and no, it has to be linked to all cultural, defense, security, law, and so on. It has an impact on the entire spectrum of activity, so we have to have someone with a vision, a large vision on those fields. That doesn't exist yet.
So we have a common understanding of the problems and not of the solutions. Renata.
Yes, just on this solution, this scenario, I think that there's incoherence between the trade policy of the EU and these kind of solutions, because at the same time that it is the obvious that the solution has to come here and either by small companies, big companies, or EU leaders are signing agreements that are impeding them to do so, and that are tying the hands of local governments, for instance, on procurement, and that's very, very, very worrying because it's so silly. It's like it's so silly that at the end the lobbyists managed to get the EU people to advocate against EU companies, and that's why, again, I remind you to keep an eye on trade developments, because, especially those in the UK, see all the bilaterals that your country is celebrating, and the next wave of free trade agreements are like, they are specifically designed to, again, lock and consolidate the power of these companies, and then it will end up at expensive arbitrations where the countries lose.
This is also something we have to take into account when we are talking about large companies, whether in US or Europe or China or wherever else.
Yeah, so I mean, just a quick note. So I mean, there are some bright spots in Europe. I mean, so for example, Barcelona, who's been involved since the beginning in the collective awareness projects program, has eventually over time recently formally announced that they were only going to procure open source software. So for their smart city as well, they were going to try to use blockchain technology for personal data. So there has been some success stories. I mean, we will see what happens in other places. There's Paris, it's not the end of the world. That being said, the national level, I think the question which is interesting between Fabrizio and Bernard is, you know, how do we actually get this power? Do we get it from networks of individual citizens who are fighting for their rights, who care about the environment, and who are actually, you know, bottom-up process producing innovation, which could be startup, could also be non-startup forms of organization? Do we get it through getting the states to change how they work, to be closer together on a top-down European level, which I also think is not a bad idea? But I think we've left out the component, and I would actually want to get Daniel Gilmore's opinion on this, which is I think we've forgotten a lot of the software developers. So many of the software developers, a lot of the GPDR was, the development of it was to some extent sped up by the Stone Revelations. I think it had been around for a very long time, but when the Stone Revelations happened, that really empowered Jan Albrecht and the people to really push very hard to renew data protections and privacy regulations in Europe. This has caused, at the same time, on the Internet Protocol front, you've seen a push from the IETF in particular to increase the amount of encryption in the deployment of TLS, to fix broken cryptography to use faster elliptic curves, to increase the uptake, much of the work of Daniel Bernstein and Tanya Long, from a technical standpoint. And I think what we lack is an overarching framework to bring together both large actors, developers who are, I think, becoming often quite politicized at this point by privacy and surveillance and blockchain technologies, and ordinary citizens. I think so Tim Berners-Lee originally had a sort of plan to do a sort of Magna Carta for the web, or a constitution, or crowdsourcing, and I haven't seen, I would like to know from Renata what the developments are on that, but we've also seen, if you look at the developer front, you've seen something quite remarkable inside the IETF, which is historically a very American-dominated body, is you've seen development of the human rights considerations for protocols group, which is trying to add not only security reviews for protocols, but ethics reviews for protocols and new protocols around issues such as privacy, personal data, and these topics. So I'd like to know both what Renata thinks was going on in the Magna Carta from the IETF angle, what Daniel Cohn-Gilmore thinks about the current working standards, and see if what the rest of the panel believes what could bring some of these things together, because they currently seem there's great work happening, but just like the city of Barcelona, it's amazing if you live in Barcelona, it's amazing to develop a working on the TLS working group to see the work to push back against sort of sketchy proposals that possibly violate security and privacy, but we haven't really seen things come together in any sort of unified, large-scale political movement, which is probably what we would need on some channel to really push the tide of history the other direction. Dan, you want to go first?
I'm not sure. I know that the general attitude within the IETF tends to be that if a request is coming specifically from a government via legal channels, that there will be a fight regardless of whether we agree with the request or not. So I'm not entirely sure that the right way to tie these things together is to have governments come to standards bodies and say, here's what we are mandating for your next stage protocol. I'm not sure what the right approach would be to that, but contributions at a technical level are often appreciated, and contributions at you must do the following thing or your system is unacceptable legally sort of raise the hackles of most of the engineers that work with there. So I'm not sure how to tie those pieces together. The human rights protocol, human rights considerations for protocols work, I think has been successful in that it has actually engaged the engineers that are working on these protocols with questions about their own ethical responsibility and the responsibility of the corporations that they work for. But it's done that without the benefit of a legal framework. So I'm not sure how to tie those together. I'd be curious to talk more if folks have ideas.
Okay, just to answer on the Magna Carta, we started the idea in 2013 after the Snowden revelations, and it was a proposal that at that moment it was focused on fixing that. We are 5 years after, and the situation only got worse. But the political awareness increased substantially, and not only among states or thinking leaders across the globe, but also even companies. We had last year even Microsoft calling for a digital Geneva Convention after all the mess on cyber attacks. And I think that at this point, Jared Cohen from former State Department, Google, and both. He was advocating for cyber peace treaty as well. So I think that this idea is resonating in more heads, and it is not only to create something that will not be binding. I think that the idea in the heads, the idea inspired by Tim Berners-Lee and supported by many, is to have some binding agreement at the global level, because it is the lack of guidance and the lack of principles and the lack of something to look at a global level is causing is an effective threat to peace. and to stability globally. And I think that in the next 5 years, I hope to see a serious step towards making that happen. And the tricky thing is that not about us, without us is my motto. And I am afraid that if it is elevated at a level of cybersecurity and the future of artificial intelligence and the principles and so on, it will be again locked. It will be discussed in a locked room without the participation of a broader group of citizens. And that's the danger I see. And I hope that we can all participate in this process, and there is something open, and it's something that not only addresses security threats, but also rights, because we need to advance our rights, and we need new rights for this new era that we were not considered before. Yeah.
I have one more follow-up. Thank you. I wanted to maybe modify my earlier comment, which was maybe a little bit too IETF-centric. There are other standards bodies where there is direct government engagement, and perhaps an opportunity here, like the ISO is clearly populated by government representatives. And if there's an interest in pushing forward for better security, better privacy for citizenry on the basis of these sort of principles, the ISO might be a place where governments are already engaged and wouldn't get pushback for the sake of being governments. To say, hey, this is the baseline standard that we're willing to accept in terms of, what kinds of protocols we're blessing with the ISO approval. So that's another option.
Okay. If there are no more questions, then I think we had a nice discussion and a nice disagreement on key topics. But even though, again, we agree on the concerns, unfortunately, and we just see them growing bigger and bigger as time goes by, so something has to be done, and urgently. Thanks a lot, and I think that this is the closing of the conference, or Harvey, if you want to say a few words.